Welcome back to the New York City Multifamily Podcast. Shaun and I are joined today by Frank Ricci and George Fontas of Fontas Advisors. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for spending your morning with us. George and Frank, you guys are lobbyists on behalf of the real estate industry as well as other industries that maybe we'll touch on a little bit today as we get to know you. But it's the middle of January right now, and the Mamdani administration is getting its feet wet here, and they are coming out guns blazing. So today we're going to talk about a lot of things: Mamdani, CEO Weaver, COPA, the Pinnacle bankruptcy sale, what you guys are working on together on behalf of industry for this year, as well as the rest of the Mamdani administration's time in office. So why don't we get started here? George, why don't we start with you? Let's start with COPA. Many of us were away on vacation or kind of turning our brains off here the last handful of days of 2025, and Eric Adams on his way out the door vetoed the latest bill of COPA that passed. So why don't you tell everyone kind of what happened and where we are with COPA today and how you feel about it?
Sure. Thanks so much for having us on again, guys. Good to see you all.
Thanks for joining us for the political tea.
You bet. No better way to start the year, right? So COPA, COPA is an interesting issue in that the City Council tried passing this bill and sneaking it through at the 11th hour. They passed somewhere around 70 bills, I think, or something in that range at their last meeting at the 11th hour, which is a huge number of bills to pass all at one time. And when they do that, it creates an opportunity to sneak things in because there's not enough time in the day to debate all of these issues, right? I think what they didn't anticipate, those individuals who were trying to sneak it past and sneak it into law, was that the real estate industry would come together in a way that I haven't seen it happen in a long time.
Seemed like the first time that we actually had an influence there.
It was really incredible. I mean, I think the real estate industry has an influence that you don't see quite a bit.
Right.
But this was a very visual demonstration of organization and coalition building that you saw come together, and trade associations from all across New York City, government affairs teams from all across New York City came together in a very coordinated way. And ultimately what we were able to achieve, and this gets a little bit wonky, but ultimately we were able to convince enough city council members that the bill was bad for various reasons. And the result of that meant that they had enough votes to pass the bill, but they did not have enough to show a supermajority of the city council. And why is that important?
Well, maybe a little numbers here are important. People should understand there's 51 council members. It takes 26, a majority, to pass a bill, but it takes 2/3, 34, to override a veto if there is a veto.
Right. So that's exactly right. So we were successful in convincing enough council members that the bill was not a good bill, and they did not have enough votes to demonstrate that they could override a veto. And so when the mayor vetoed the bill at the 11th hour, also at his 11th hour, December 31st, it was a signal to the new leadership of the New York City Council, hey, we don't have enough votes here. Naturally, if we want to go get these votes, we're going to have to work to go get these votes. And there's problems with this bill already that people are uncomfortable with. So we're going to have to we might have to rework the bill altogether. And you can't just rework a bill once it's been vetoed. The bill that's been vetoed is the bill that you have to override. You can't amend.
It's not like chapter amendments and the governor type.
No. Oh, so they can't go create a new COPA from scratch?
They would have to.
They would have to.
They would have to do that. They can't take the bill that was passed and say, all right, well, let's just fix this little comma here or this period here and then override the mayor's veto.
And they may very well do that. I mean, there's a group of council members who still believe that this is the right way to go. So, yeah.
And do we have, are there any, there's no new council members, or are there any?
There are.
Where are we in like the cycle? Like how many people of the 51, how many are now new and replaced as of January 1st?
Yeah, it's about 11 just because of the funkiness of the way people came in. Some people came in right in November because they were replacing people who had left a little early. So for all intents and purposes, there's 11 new members.
And how many of the 11 voted against COPA, and how many of the new 11 would be in favor of COPA?
We anticipate that the replacements will vote the same way that their predecessors.
But a big change happened with the council speaker, right? Julia Menon is the new incoming council speaker, and she's a much more moderate force, is from what I can tell. So, is that the person that the industry, needs to kind of really make sure that we're providing the right info and data for? Because to me, that's like the gateway to stopping some of the Mamdani stuff. And a lot of people always say, everything happens at Albany that matters, yada, yada. But like the city council can kill you with 1,000 paper cuts.
That's true. But I, when it comes to government relations, which is one thing that I think we do well, as well as many of the other groups, you just don't want to depend on the leader of any body, whether it's the legislature, the Senate, the Assembly, or the council, and go to that one person and say, hey, this is bad. And even if they agree with you, they are creatures of the body they represent. So you have to do a lot of lobbying work is from the ground up. So it's incumbent on the same coalition that got less than a majority to vote for this bill to now go back out to those same people and say, hey, here now we have more time. You're not passing 70 bills all at once, but let's sit down and really discuss COPA or whatever variation of COPA, and here's why it's not a good thing for your constituents. And from the ground up, get those individual members now to start saying to the leader, you know what, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Even though I put my name on the last bill, I've evolved now, and I don't think it's such a good idea.
So right now, would you say that it's kind of faded away? I mean, obviously it can come back at any moment, but is the momentum kind of gone as far as your tea leaves are kind of showing?
I think that we're beginning a whole new 4-year cycle of the city council, and there's a lot of items on the agenda. So I don't see anyone rushing into any issues right away, other than things that may be on the Albany agenda. Universal child care is one of them. There's a lot of other issues that dominate. And then when you get into March and April and May, it's all about the city council budget,
right,
as well as in the legislature.
That's right. But I don't want to leave you thinking that this thing has gone away, that COPA has gone away. It has not gone away. There are still conversations happening. They're not at full speed at the moment. As Frank said, we just got started again. They don't even know who has, the council members don't know which committees they're on and which committees they're chairing. So there's still some, sort of organizational work that has to happen at the city council. But conversations have started on whether they override that or not. Is there a new version, a watered down, or even a more watered down version? And so that's all in the works. By the way, I'll give you a quick example, which I think you'll quickly recognize, of where it's dangerous to focus on just one, ultimately on one person. And so in 2019, HSTPA, which you are both very well aware of up in Albany, the strategy there was to try to build sort of a firewall at the state Senate to hold back that legislation as long as possible until we can get then Governor Cuomo to come in and sort of put his foot on and say, I'm not doing this, right? And have him team with a small set of senators who would ultimately wind up killing that bill. The industry was actually successful. It was part of it, and so was Frank. We were in different roles at the time, but we were both successful with others in building that firewall at the state Senate. And if you recall, going back 7 years now, 6.5 years, it dragged on and it dragged on. And people, when are you going to pass this legislation? And there was the press was all over this, and they were asking Cuomo. And ultimately, Andrew Cuomo didn't do what we had hoped he would do, right? So it was sort of a two-phase strategy, but the strategy really ultimately required one person to stand up and kill something, and that one person didn't do that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So Julie Menon is fantastic. I think she's well regarded, personally liked. I think she's going to be a tremendous speaker of the city council. I think that the business community is lucky to have her. The real estate industry is very lucky to have her. But you can't put all your chips on that bet.
Right. Where are you guys, as things kind of get settled here, allocating your resources in terms of, call it, defense spending? Like, how are you guys thinking about what to really focus on preventing or advocating for, there's so much coming down the pike here, and it's like drinking from a fire hose, I'm sure. But like, what are your initial gut instincts on where to spend your time?
Yeah, really. I'm sorry, Frank. Let me just comment. Sorry about
I was just going to say, you're talking about the Homeowners for an Affordable New York Coalition. So, we spent a lot of time since session ended last year trying to come up with a positive agenda rather than a solely defensive agenda, which has been traditionally with the real estate industries. That's the position they've been in. So I know before we started this, we talked a little bit about the fact that housing production is important. I think you're going to see in the governor's State of the State today that she talks about loosening up the environmental review process to develop new housing. That's part of our coalition's agenda. It's important to the groups we represent outside the city, as well as developers in the city. I think our big thing, and this goes to the multi-housing sector in the city, is everyone's talking about now Mamdani, the governor, the legislature, the city. We have to produce more housing. So we can debate the number of vacant units out there that are awaiting rehabilitation, but if there was change in the law to allow owners, managers to rehab apartments, you could probably put at least 10,000, maybe up to 40,000 units back on the market in New York City within 6 to 8 months. But there's no incentive to do that now. All the housing production that people are talking about statewide and citywide of new housing takes a minimum of 5 years, 6 years from beginning to end, soup to nuts, from conception to actually getting someone to move in. So I think our challenge is if we can convince people to, hey, there's a reasonable way to bring these units back on the market without creating harassment of existing tenants, which was the big argument.
Correct. That's what I think people miss on this whole argument of why would they not just let vacant apartments be rented again? And I don't agree with any of it, but it was because of the buyout culture to a certain group of people that don't want that to return. We as an industry need to put forth the safeguards that exist in every other industry, penalize bad actors, same as we do in every other facet of society, and stick to that, because that's the only thing that makes sense. Why you wouldn't reform
and the reality was, even back in 2019 and even now, there's at least 22 or 23 different laws to protect tenants against harassment. And it's a question of, does government utilize the tools they have? I don't think you need any new laws to protect against harassment. But yes, there's bad actors in the real estate industry. There's bad actors in every industry, whether it's medicine, education, public policy, whatever. So, but government's got to act to utilize that.
Listen, you have to remember that there is an agenda. All right. There is the idea to protect tenants, and tenants should be protected, as all consumers should be protected appropriately, because there are some, not a lot, but there are some bad actors, and people need to be protected. That's the role of government, and I don't think anybody really argues with that. That's fine, right? But there is a larger agenda, which is ultimately to try to socialize as much of the private sector housing as can be privatized. That has been burst out onto the scene over the last 2 weeks. It's something that we've known since 2019, because we're in this battle every day, and it started with HSTPA from 2019 in Albany. And it started with the exact people who are now in City Hall. So make no mistake about it. There's protecting tenants, which is fine. In fact, our coalition is calling for more judicial resources to both protect landlord, property owners, and tenants. And that's in our agenda, and it's front and center in our agenda. We think that the courts are completely overwhelmed and that they need more resources to do the work that they need to do. At the same time, you have to recognize there is a bill now in Albany that creates the social housing authority. And this creation would basically, this entity would basically create an opportunity for the government to take, hold, develop housing, and basically create a new public housing authority, but for New York State rather than NYCHA here in New York City.
This is to build, or this is to take away from private ownership and put it in a
both
government bucket?
Both.
Wow. Okay, so this is a bill at the state level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is
so. Just to go back to COPA for a minute, I mean, in private discussions that myself and others had during the COPA debate, especially for the last 2 months or whatever, let's say, and I'm not going to name any council members' names or other people involved in it, but when you would say, look, there's nothing that prevents a not-for-profit entity from bidding on a building now the same way a private entity might. And I don't know any owner who cares, who's buying the building. They'll sell it to the highest bidder. That's what they want, or the best price. But, and the response I got from the hardcore people supporting COPA was, you don't understand. That's not what we want. This is the way to socialize housing. This is the way to get it out of private hands and put it into the social housing network. It's like, but they could do that now.
I think this is a really important distinction because you have to know your enemy or know who you're up against, and it's like two different ways to fight it. If somebody just wants to protect tenants, we can propose those solutions, but they're going to fall flat on the face. And I'm just wondering, it's starting to seem like, is this a 50-50 balance of power between true socialists and then people who actually care about tenants? Is it is it only through lawsuits that we can fight the socialist crowd if that's the agenda that they have? I'm just wondering how the approach changes when you realize, oh, this isn't about the tenants. This is about seizing and collecting, assets from private individuals at a depressed price. And that was the intention all along. How does the industry fight that? Do we have a list of who the true socialists and who the pro-tenant people are? And
there's a simple agenda to that. There's a simple answer. It's all the above.
Yeah.
It's the real estate industry's got to get involved in political campaigns, challenging some of the quote, democratic socialists and their agenda. It's lawsuits, it's lobbying, it's public relations, it's everything. It's not just one single thing.
And I don't think, real estate industry, I think, conjures up this mind of big owners or big trade associations or developers, and it's not just them, right? It's the owner of the 2 or 3 family house in Brooklyn, or maybe they have 2 buildings on an avenue with a storefront on the bottom and like 4 apartments upstairs, right? They're not moguls. They're just average New Yorkers. They, in fact, very likely that they were, their families were immigrants from another country, and that's part of how they help build their generational wealth. Certainly, you're seeing that a lot in the Black community now, building generational wealth, and the rug is being pulled out from under that community with new laws and new tactics that they're being proposed. So I think Frank is right. It's an all of the above, right? Yes, there's an element of protecting tenants, and I honestly don't think anybody opposes that.
No.
But then there's this other element, this larger thing that I'm talking about. This is not a conspiracy theory. We're seeing this play out in actual real time, in real life. So we're calling it out, or a lot of people are calling it out. You're seeing it. The Wall Street Journal wrote about this, I think, yesterday or maybe Sunday in January. This is not a fringe concept. This is actually playing out in real time.
And on the political side, it's not just the real estate industry cannot do it by itself.
Right.
It's got to be coalition building. And traditionally, the real estate industry has worked alongside of, for example, charter schools, other business groups around the city and state. And that's what it's got to be, because they're all sort of under siege, for lack of a better term, from a different agenda than they've seen in a long time.
Right. And the press. I mean, can we talk about the Pinnacle bankruptcy? As government consultants, there was a crazy admission by the mayor's office in their objection to the plan, which basically said, you can't do the bankruptcy auction because the next owner is inevitably going to fall into bankruptcy again because of the low rents that are in place. And so you can't sell it because the next owner is also going to fall into bankruptcy. Was that a communications error? Was that an intentional setup to maybe have some reform? Was it just a 34-year-old in office for the first time? Like, how do you walk that back?
I think that's one of the byproducts of them not being prepared for what they were doing. And I think that admission in a legal document will come back at some point in the future to haunt them. Be it at the Supreme
Court, freeze
Court,
rents movement,
Second Circuit. So, yeah, but to me, that's an admission of a taking.
Yes.
Private property.
Yes.
But that is the exact example of what I just described as trying to take housing and create a social housing authority and put the housing into that and have the government run it. That is exactly what they were saying. They were saying, you can't sell this. We'll take it. Forget about where we'll find the money for it, but we'll take it, and we will figure it out. And I got to tell you, at some point, I'm going to do a little research. I want to find out, if asked, ask an average New Yorker, would you prefer to live in publicly owned housing or privately owned housing? My gut tells me that the vast majority of them are going to say privately.
That would actually be a really interesting survey. That would be a really good poll.
I would also add to that, and George has heard me say this before, in my prior life when I was with RSA for many years, we would do polling every 2 or 3 years, going back to the late 80s, middle 80s actually, and consistently for 35, 40 years, if you asked, when you were polling registered voters, not owners, but a cross section of the city, statistically valid polls, 60 to 70% of the people thought landlords weren't a great group of people, but the same 60 to 70% liked their owner or their manager.
Yeah, once you put somebody's name and face on it, it's very different than
a lot of them. They were all happy with. It's like Congress. Yeah, they were happy with their person, but they don't like the business in general.
So what authority did Mamdani have to try to intervene on this bankruptcy sale? And the bankruptcy judge ruled against their claim pretty quickly, but what's stopping Mamdani and his administration from doing this again on any sale?
I'm not a lawyer. I didn't look at the papers closely, but I assume they just made a motion to intervene as interveners. And look, anyone can go to court and file anything they want whenever they want.
Right.
So, I think the city always has standing to intervene in anything that affects the city. I think your next podcast, you should have a group of lawyers sitting around here and they can get into the weeds on that. But, I don't think anything's going to stop him or his administration from, intervening on anything they see as politically advantageous.
I would fully expect them to. Yeah. That's the point that I'm outlining, right? Like this is their opportunity to the final piece in their goal, which was a multi-year, decade in the making, elect more people who have similar ideology as them, pass legislation. The tactics that they used to pass legislation was very aggressive. They have rallies in front of people's parents' houses on holidays. They chase people down the street when they're going to get a sandwich for lunch. I mean, it's very aggressive in some ways that people aren't usually being confronted, and it's scary. And I don't blame elected officials for having anxiety about that, right? And saying, okay, fine, we'll vote with you, just back off. Right. It's a bullying. And so they achieved that in 2019, and they worked on smaller things along the way to continue to lower the value of property and make those properties such that they cannot afford their expenses. Meanwhile, expenses continue to go up. The next piece of it is freeze the rent. So now we won't even let you increase your rent if your expenses are going up, right? They changed MCIs and IAIs again to reduce the ability for the owner to bring in the dollars. Meanwhile, the quality of the housing stock, which was okay before, is now going down, right? And so when it comes time to, I can't afford this building anymore. The rents aren't there. I can't do MCIs or IAIs. Financially, the building has fallen in disrepair, and physically the building has fallen in disrepair. Therefore, once it hits the market, it's not valued what it was 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. The government can now take that building at a much lower price.
Right. So here's my follow-up question, Seth. I don't mean to interject. When ideology confronts economic reality, that's where this stuff usually falls apart, right? And most, the whole joke, when you run out of spending other people's money, that's when, you'll see. So my question is about the New York City budget. And where are they going to get? I get the theory and the ideology, but where are they going to get the money? Is the city's budget flush with just extra cash laying around? Okay, so do we just try to let this process play out and be like, oh, there's no money for this? Is that what has to happen?
I think that's tomorrow's problem.
Okay,
right. So, and that's the answer to the question, right? So, little by little, the government will identify financial needs. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to have $10 billion hit on your book, right? Mm-hmm. One, it's going to be 500 million, and then it's going to be $1 billion, then $1.5 billion, whatever the numbers are, right? And then every year the government's going to go back and say, well, we need dollars. Right. And so where are we going to find them? Well, let's come up with creative ways to find those dollars. Are there ways that we could use bonding to develop new housing, to generate new dollars, to fund the old? There's all sorts of financial ways to figure it out, right? Go to Albany and ask for more money from there. So that's tomorrow's problem. But right now, it's enact this larger vision. And if you listen to people on the far left in the DSA, people who talk about tenant protections and housing and all the time, I'm not like inventing. They say these things out loud. We're just putting it all together. Right.
Yeah. Sia Weaver has been another just figure that, rightly so, has picked up national news because she's been very open about this. Under the cloak of tenant protection, it's really about us taking back the buildings.
But I think your initial question gets to the real heart of the issue. Who is caused the affordability problem? Who has raised the rent really in the last 20 some years to make New York City less affordable? And as a small owner myself, but having dealt with literally hundreds, if not thousands of owners over the years, it's the government. It used to be, I can tell you precisely, when Michael Bloomberg took office, my building and on other buildings, property taxes were about 18% of the total of your rent dollar. So for every dollar you would take in, about 18% went to the city. It's now between property tax and water and sewer, which is really another tax. It used to be part of your tax bill. It's now 35 to 40%.
Right.
Yeah, building owners have partners. They never asked to be partners in their buildings who are taking that much money. And that's, under the Bloomberg administration, they viewed property taxes as well. The value's going up. Let's just grab that value. They did 2 mid-year tax increases on the tax rate, which has never happened before, twice during his administration. So that has really driven the affordability issue, and that's who's been really raising the rent over the last 25 years.
And I think it's really important, at least for me, to be clear. I don't want to demonize a tenant either. Tenants, not all of them, but a lot of them can't afford their rent. Like, we have to acknowledge that, right? We have to acknowledge that the city is an extremely expensive place to live, whether it's the cost of milk or the cost of rent or whatever. The best deal you can get is the subway, that's for sure, right? But other than that, yeah, a lot of people are having a hard time meeting their financial needs. I think there has to be an acknowledgement of that and a look at what are the macro economics around the situation that are affecting that, and how do we help it? How do we help change or address that? And maybe we can't at the New York City level. Maybe macroeconomics are too big for New York City to address on its own. But I think it is important, at least to acknowledge, if we're being honest, that there are a lot of people who have a hard time and they are struggling to meet their rent, and some people do need help. The question is, what's the help that they need, and what else can we be doing to try to make the whole city more affordable, not just this one element.
Yeah, and I think from the city government's perspective, they view real estate as a value business. It's not. It's a cash flow business.
Yeah.
And owners need to maintain their cash flow. It's not about owners buying long-term owners, which is what you want. Don't care about how much the value of their building is shooting up every year. What they care about is the cash flow in, the cash flow out.
Correct.
And I have a very specific sensitivity, my wife and I renting our apartments over the years, to the artist community. We live close to Lincoln Center. We've always had a lot of people who work at Lincoln Center, whether in the tech area or the performing area. We would love to continue to rent to them at a reasonable rent, because we've been there for decades, and we want to support, but you can't anymore.
No,
you can't. It's impossible.
We had I grew up in Bay Ridge. And I was raised by a single mom. I have an older brother and an older sister. And we have a 2-family house. My parents had bought and my father had left. And he left us with this 2-family house that had all these sorts of tax liens on them. And I don't know how my mother was able to figure it out as a secretary in the New York City public school system, probably making, $30,000 a year or something, right? And we had that second apartment upstairs in our 2-family house. And I remember we had a tenant there for the longest time. It was a man and a woman. They had no children. They were a little bit older than my mom. And as I got older and I started recognizing these things, I said, Mom, they've been there a long time. Do they pay a lot of rent? I started asking these kinds of questions when you get into high school and things, right? And she said, I haven't raised their rent in a long time. I said, well, why? That kind of seems silly, because I'm a kid. Like, what do I know? And she said, because their name was Bulovich, Mr. and Mrs. Bulovich. I remember. And she said, well, Mr. Bulovich is a very handy guy, and he's able to come down and help us in the house when we need things. Your dad's not around, the dishwasher breaks or the boiler isn't working or something. Mr. Bulovich is able to come down and help us out. That's the synergy that you're talking about, totally. Frank. And that's always stuck with me, right? And I think that's a New York thing. It's a human thing. And I think that's driven me. That's why when I say, I don't want to demonize tenants and what they're able to pay, because, in some ways we lived that life. Yes, we own the property. But the reality of it is that, we didn't have much. We were a property owner. We didn't have much. My mom did a great job making us feel like we were middle-class kids in a middle-class neighborhood. But from a financial perspective, we weren't.
Stakes are large right now.
What are the rental ripoff hearings? Is this just like a billboard, a bumper sticker, or is this like an actual
theater? It's theater.
Is this an actual thing?
It's a kangaroo court. It's a show trial.
Okay.
It is. They have already determined what the result of these hearings will be because they've named them the rental ripoff hearing.
Right.
I mean, if there was ever an obvious point of view or an obvious piece of evidence, it's right there. So we know exactly what it is. They are going to try to organize across New York City, probably in multiple boroughs, maybe one in each borough, a hearing in which they give a venue for individuals to come and complain, and they're encouraging people to come in and complain about their property owner and their rent and their conditions, and that's what it is. It's a kangaroo court. It's a show trial.
So the Rent Guidelines Board, which is mandated by Section 510 of the Rent Stabilization Law, has a mandate. They will start their hearings in March. And part of the law says that they have a very specific market basket of issues to look at and determine what those increases or decreases are. But everyone knows it will be increases because, as I said earlier, property taxes, insurance, fuel, everyone knows these things have gone up and will continue to go up. And then their mandate is that they, under the law, that they have to, vote on an appropriate rent increase that kind of mirrors that. The rent ripoff hearings are going to be the predicate, which is outside the law,
right,
to say zero rent increase.
Right, it's an intimidation type of
Where
thing.
are we with RGB and the board members? I saw one of the guys that Eric Adams appointed just backed out at 9 p.m. on December 31st or something.
Two people, the same. There's one vacancy, and then the mayor also gets to appoint the chairman who sits at the pleasure of the mayor. So he's got to appoint two new people.
Is he gonna have? He's gonna have 5.
He'll have enough votes to enact whatever his policy is.
The rent freeze is the policy.
In this case, the rent freeze.
Okay.
By the way,
it's reasonable for the industry to assume a rent freeze in June?
I think it's a reasonable expectation, and we'll see what happens, right? But there's always a percentage chance that it won't happen.
He's going to do 1% just so he doesn't get sued because of all the other stuff with the bankruptcy admission and stuff. He'll toe the line just so he...
Yeah, you'll see, I think, late April, early May, they come out with the price index of operating cost. And let's just say, for argument's sake, if it's 6, 7, 8%, let's say, how do the board, it'd be very hard for them to justify a zero rent increase based on that, unless they use the rent ripoff hearings as a reason to do it. We'll see.
And keep in mind, RGB, as you guys know, is focused on rent regulated units, right? Mm-hmm. But this kangaroo court that they're having over the course of the spring doesn't say anything about RGB in it. Mm-hmm. It's just rent. Right. And so what you're doing is you're saying, no, we're going to create a venue that's not just tightly focused with these group of people who are going to come and complain at this hearing. We're going to create a citywide hearing and let everybody in the city, every renter or not, come in and testify. So actually the noise around this issue will be much louder because the size of it will be much louder.
I was just going to say, we should send some NYCHA tenants there to talk about their owner, the city of New York, and how nice that is to live in, and maybe have a landlord's forum ourselves. Well, I shouldn't say landlord. I hate this.
It's funny you say that because over the years I've attended numerous rent guideline board hearings, especially when they're doing the vote on the preliminary guideline or the final one, and there are tenants who are bussed in, especially from some of the not-for-profit groups, let's say in the Bronx or Brooklyn. And when you start talking to the tenants, you realize that more than just 5% or 10%, actually already live either in subsidized housing or already on Section 8 or on city FEPs. Like, well, why are you here? This doesn't even affect, well, we're here.
Yeah, 100%.
Interesting. Let's wrap up with some optimistic stuff. And also want to hear about lawsuits, maybe, or challenges. What is the industry doing offensively to combat some of the administration's goals?
I think there's a lawsuit out there that was filed a month or two ago for the Institute of Justice.
Yeah.
So taking off the prior case that went to the Supreme Court that was rejected, looking at the dissent that was written by Clarence Thomas, he wrote in his dissent, well, if you give us an as-applied case, a specific case, that's worth looking at. So I believe the Institute for Justice lawsuit is doing exactly that. So that's one lawsuit. There's the Tax Equity Now, New York, the Tenney lawsuit, which was actually won almost 2 years ago, 23 months ago, and the city has dragged its feet in terms of implementing. For about a year, they said, well, you didn't win. And finally, when it went back to the judge who was originally in front of, said, yeah, they did win. So I think that may come to a head soon because I believe there's oral arguments again within the last month or two, and they're waiting for the judge to actually rule on that. That could have a profound impact on the property tax system as it relates to rental property in the city. Class 2 property.
Yeah, it seems like I always get confused with that. This is actually a hot topic for a lot of owners. There's, I always get confused. The state caps on how the assessed value can spike on the smaller buildings, the condos, but there's a state cap, and whether that state cap has to be lifted. But can they, at a city level, change the tax rate on condos, small 1 to 3 families?
So the answer is yes. The cities, it's within they don't need to go back to Albany to change anything. The City Department of Finance can actually start within Class 2, which is co-ops and condos. The lawsuit basically said there's never been a law that really said to assess co-ops and condos as if they were rent-regulated buildings, which is what their practice has been for 40 years. So I think part of the Tenney lawsuit says, hey, start assessing co-ops and condos to their market value. And in doing that, since Class 2 is a fixed share, that may bring the overall rate down for Class 2, which would help rental buildings.
Okay, interesting.
Shaun, how do you think, just kind of talking to clients out there that are listening, how do you think clients that are calling up right now thinking, gosh, I can't believe this is where we are. What should I do? Can I stick around for 4 more years? That are kind of in the, should I sell now? Should I wait? What should I do? What would you say to the average apartment building owner that is kind of looking in the mirror, trying to figure out which way is up and deciding what to do?
I mean, it depends on how much energy you have on a day-to-day basis, but I think the warning signs for the next 4 years are there. I mean, I've been the biggest optimist that these laws have to change because it's common sense that they have to change, but I clearly didn't live through some of these periods of history where it takes decades for them to change. I think owners to sell, properties where there's a bid sell gap need to get creative. We've started with some second financing. So, if there's a buyer and seller gap of 500,000, maybe we structure that gap as a silent second, across the entire portfolio. And, the buyer's obviously making the bet that something should be changing positively. It's a way to get the seller a little bit something more in the future, but they don't get everything today. I just think that, you really have to figure out a way to justify, what you're doing every day. But for the buyers out there, some of them are stepping into a new balance sheet. They are seeing cap rates very high, and they think at the prices that they're paying, they can outlive the city or outsurvive the entire city. So, everything there's pain on one person's balance sheet is an opportunity for maybe, somebody else on the other side. And that's what the market's here for. But yeah, if I'm already past expiration date on my retirement package, I wouldn't stick around and wait for this experiment to play out.
Yeah, fair enough. Well said. All right, George, Frank, thank you guys for coming to hang out. If anyone wants to get in touch with you guys and reach out, what's the best way for people to contact you?
Easy way to find us is on our website, fontasadvisors.com. And you'll be able to find us on the contact page. and you should be able to reach Frank or myself pretty easily.
Yeah, and just so the audience know, it's more than just a legislative consultancy. It's rezonings, anything real estate related that involves the government. Think of Fontas Advisors. So thanks for coming in, guys.
Thanks, fellas.
Thanks, guys.